You are just too poor for me. You cannot marry me.
The first thing Frank noticed when he walked through the door was the music. It was the kind of music that costs money. A live jazz quartet in matching burgundy suits, playing something smooth and expensive in the corner of the most decorated backyard Frank had ever seen in his old neighborhood. White tents stretched from one end of the property to the other. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light. Waiters in pressed shirts moved through the crowd like they had been trained at a hotel, balancing champagne flutes on silver trays that probably cost more than Frank's first month of rent in Brussels. Frank stood at the entrance in faded blue jeans, worn brown boots, and an old gray jacket that had seen better days. He was holding a bouquet of white lilies. 7 years. That was how long he had been holding on to this moment in his mind. 7 years of imagining the look on her face when he finally came home. 7 years of building something from nothing across an ocean, working through nights that bled into mornings, closing deals that would have made his younger self dizzy with disbelief, all while carrying a single question in the back of his mind like a stone he could not put down. Does she still love me? Or does she love what she thinks I will become? He had not told anyone he was coming. That was intentional. He had booked a one-way flight from Brussels to Chicago under a name his assistant used for private travel. No press release, no security detail, no luxury car waiting at the curb. He had taken a cab from the airport like any other man coming home after a long time away, because Frank Raymond Carter had decided that the only way to know the truth was to remove every possible reason for someone to lie to him. If she still loved him when he looked like nothing, then he would know it was real. If she did not, he did not let himself finish that thought. A woman near the entrance looked him up and down the way people look at someone who has wandered into the wrong zip code. Her eyes moved from his jacket to his boots, to the beat-up cab disappearing down the street, and her expression shifted into something between confusion and the particular kind of pity people reserve for those they have already decided do not belong. "Can I help you?" she asked slowly. "I'm here to see Simone," Frank said calmly. Something flickered across the woman's face, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, the kind of micro-expression that people make when they know something you do not and are deciding whether to enjoy your ignorance. "You mean," she paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be cruel, "the bride." The word hit him like a closed fist to the chest. Bride. He did not let it show on his face. 17 years of negotiating with people who wanted to take everything from him had taught Frank that the man who reacts first loses twice, so he simply nodded once and walked past her. The crowd was thick. 60, maybe 70 people arranged under the tents, all of them dressed like the invitation had come with a dress code that Frank had never received. Women in designer heels clicking against the wooden platform floor. Men in pressed summer suits with pocket squares that matched their wives' dresses. Children in clothes that probably cost more than Frank's entire outfit combined, running between tables while their parents pretended not to notice. The whispers started the moment he stepped onto the grass. Quiet at first, the way whispers always start, like small fires testing whether there is enough air to grow. Then louder. "Who is that? Does he have an invitation? He looks lost. Baby, is that man wearing work boots to a wedding?" Frank kept walking. His face remained calm, almost unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that unsettles people because they cannot find the crack in it. Because Frank had learned a very long time ago, in apartments where the heat did not work and on streets where showing weakness was an invitation, that a man who reacts to every small fire burns himself down before anything else does. Then the music stopped. The jazz quartet lowered their instruments mid-phrase, and the sudden silence was so complete that Frank could hear the ice shifting in someone's glass 3 tables away. And from across the yard, across 60 people and 24 white rose centerpieces, and a 3-tiered wedding cake that had not been cut yet. Simone Bridges turned around. She was wearing a white gown that must have taken months to design. The fabric caught the afternoon light in a way that made her look almost ethereal, like a photograph that had been softened at the edges. Her hair was pinned up elegantly, small pearls woven through the dark curls. Her makeup was perfect. She was, without question, the most beautiful she had ever looked, and Frank felt his heart crack open at the sight of her because even now, even standing in the middle of his own ambush, some part of him still loved her. And then their eyes met, and the color drained from her face. "FR," she started. Then she caught herself, glancing quickly at the crowd around her, calculating. "Frank." The entire yard went quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a room simultaneously realizes they are about to witness something they will be talking about for years. Frank smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that does not need an audience. "I came home," he said simply, "like I promised." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the man beside Simone stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a slate-gray suit that fit like it had been measured twice. He had the polished look of a man who had practiced being impressive for so long that it had become his personality. From the way he stood with his shoulders deliberately squared to the way his hand moved to Simone's back with the casual possessiveness of a man marking territory. He extended his other hand toward Frank with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Terrence Knight," he said, not warmly, the way a man states his name when he wants it to land like a warning. Frank shook his hand. "Frank Carter." Terrence looked him over once. Slowly, the jacket, the jeans, the boots, the lilies already beginning to wilt slightly in the afternoon heat. "So you're the famous Frank." Terrence's voice had a practiced ease to it, the kind that carried just enough condescension to sting, but just little enough to deny if anyone called him on it. "Simone told me about you, said you went to Europe to make something of yourself." He paused, let the silence stretch. "How'd that work out?" A few people laughed, quietly, nervously, the way people laugh when they are not sure they should but want to be on the winning side. Frank did not answer. He was looking at Simone. She looked away. "Frank," Simone said. And now her voice had recovered its steadiness, wrapped in the practiced warmth of someone delivering bad news gently. "I didn't know you were coming back." "I told you I would," Frank said. "You said a lot of things." She lifted her chin slightly, a defensive gesture, one Frank recognized from 1,000 small arguments in their past. 7 years is a long time. "I know. I couldn't keep waiting. I understand." And then Simone did something that the people who witnessed it would remember for a long time. She laughed. Not a gentle, uncomfortable laugh. Not the nervous laugh of a woman trying to ease tension in an awkward situation. It was a sharp, social laugh, the kind designed to be heard by everyone, the kind designed to bring the room in on a joke at someone else's expense. She laughed and glanced at Terrence and then back at Frank, and she said, "You actually came, in that." Her eyes dropped to his outfit, moving slowly from his jacket to his boots like she was cataloging evidence. "Frank, I'm marrying a man who actually has a future." The yard erupted. Not everyone laughed, but enough people did that the sound of it filled the space between Frank and Simone like a physical barrier, like a wall built from amusement and relief that they were not the ones standing where he was standing. Terrence smiled like a man who had just won something he had not even had to fight for. "She deserves the best," Terrence said, loud enough for the back row to hear. "Not broken promises and a goodwill wardrobe." More laughter, louder this time, more confident. A woman near the back whispered to her husband loudly enough to be heard by 3 tables. He drove to her wedding in a taxi. A taxi, can you imagine? Frank stood in the middle of all of it. Still calm. He looked down at the white lilies in his hand. The same flowers he had given her the day he proposed, 7 years ago, in a small park 3 blocks from the apartment where his mother still lived back then. He remembered how Simone had cried when she said yes. He remembered believing that he had found the one person in the world who saw him clearly, who understood that what he was building would take time, but would be worth the wait. He looked up at Simone one more time. Her expression had moved past cruelty now and settled into something more complicated. something that looked almost like relief and almost like grief at the same time. The expression of a woman who had made a choice and needed this moment, needed his humiliation, to confirm that the choice had been right. Frank placed the bouquet of white lilies on the nearest table. Slowly, carefully, like he was setting down something he no longer needed to carry. Then he reached into the pocket of his old gray jacket and closed his fingers around something small and cold and round. He held it for 2 seconds, feeling its weight, remembering the months he had saved for it when he had nothing, remembering how certain he had been that he would place it on her finger and spend the rest of his life beside her. Then he left it in his pocket. "I hope he makes you happy," Frank said. And he walked back through the crowd, back through the entrance, back out to the street. Nobody stopped him. Behind him, the jazz quartet started playing again. And Simone Bridges watched the door close and felt, for the first time all day, like she could not breathe. But that is not where this story starts. Not even close. Because to understand why Frank Carter walked into that wedding wearing old clothes when he could have arrived in a motorcade, to understand why he stood there and took that humiliation without flinching, to understand the complicated truth that would shatter everything Simone thought she knew. You have to go back, way back, to a small apartment on the south side of Chicago, where a woman named Diane Carter once chose her son's future over her own survival. And to another apartment across town, where a father named Raymond Bridges made a decision that would cost his daughter everything. If you are new here, welcome. This channel tells the stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss what happens next. Because this story has twists that will leave you speechless. Now let us continue. The south side of Chicago does not apologize for what it is. The cold comes early and stays late. The buildings are old and tired-looking, like they have been through too many hard seasons to care any more about appearances. The streets have character, which is a kind way of saying they have cracks and stories and pain baked right into the concrete. That is where Diane Carter raised her son. Alone. Frank's father left before Frank could form a memory of him. Just walked out one December morning and never came back, leaving nothing behind but a closet half full of clothes that Diane eventually donated, and a silence that settled over the apartment like dust. She never spoke badly about the man. She simply never spoke about him at all, which Frank later understood was its own kind of grief. The grief of a woman who decided that anger was a luxury she could not afford when there were bills to pay and a child to feed. Diane worked 3 jobs. Mornings, she cleaned office buildings downtown. The kind of work where you start before the sun rises and finish before most people's alarms go off, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans while the city sleeps. And if you are lucky, nobody notices you were ever there. She used to say that invisibility was its own kind of skill, that the best cleaners were ghosts, and Frank did not understand what she meant until years later when he realized she was also talking about survival. Afternoons, she stocked shelves at a grocery store on 79th Street, where she had worked long enough that the manager had stopped learning her name and started calling her the reliable one, which was his version of a compliment. Nights, 3 nights a week, she washed dishes at a soul food restaurant on the other side of the neighborhood until past midnight. The owner, a heavy-set man named Mr. Clarence, once offered her a raise. She thanked him and asked if he could give it to her in cash so it would not affect her benefits, and Mr. Clarence had looked at her for a long moment with something like respect and something like sorrow before nodding and never mentioning it again. She slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3. Every dollar she earned went into 2 places, the rent and Frank. When Frank was 10, he found a notebook under Diane's mattress while looking for a lost sock. He had not been snooping. He was just a child looking for his property, and there it was, a small spiral notebook with a blue cover, hidden beneath the place where his mother slept. He opened it. Inside were columns, neat. Careful columns written in his mother's handwriting. Every week, she had written down what she earned, what she spent, and at the bottom of each column, a small number labeled Frank School Fund. Some weeks the number was $5. Some weeks it was 12. One week the number was 0, and next to it his mother had written in tiny letters, "Next time." Frank put the notebook back exactly where he found it. He never mentioned it to her. But he never forgot it either. At 12, Frank started tutoring younger kids in the building for $2 a session. Some parents paid and some did not, but Frank showed up either way because the point was never really the money. The point was that he had finally found something he could do, something small but real, to make sure he was not just taking from the world without giving something back. At 15, he was fixing neighbors' laptops and phones, teaching himself from YouTube videos and library books because he could not afford real classes. At 16, he was studying past midnight with a flashlight because the apartment's electricity had been shut off for 4 days, and Diane did not want to tell him why. He knew why. He always knew. He just never made her feel bad about it. His classmates thought he was strange, too serious, too quiet, too focused on things that did not seem to have any immediate payoff. "Why you always studying?" a boy named Jerome asked him once in the hallway of their high school. Jerome was popular, the kind of kid who moved through the school like he owned it, and he had stopped Frank outside the library with the casual cruelty of someone who has never had to work for anything important. "You grew up here same as us. You think a report card changes your zip code?" Frank looked at Jerome calmly. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away. "My mama works 3 jobs," Frank said. "I'm not going to let that be for nothing." Jerome did not have a response for that. Nobody ever really did. "Now let me take you across town." Because while Diane Carter was working herself to the bone for her son's future, another parent was making decisions that would eventually collide with everything Frank had built. Raymond Bridges lived in a slightly better neighborhood, which is to say the streetlights worked, and the grocery store was not a 20-minute bus ride away. He had built a small plumbing business over 30 years, nothing fancy, but enough to keep his family comfortable. Enough to give his daughter Simone things he never had. New clothes for school, a car when she turned 18, a college education at a university where no one knew how hard her father had worked to afford the tuition. Raymond loved his daughter. That was never in question. But Raymond was also afraid. The kind of bone-deep inherited fear that passes from generation to generation like an heirloom no one asked for. His father had died poor. His grandfather had died poorer. Raymond had clawed his way to something resembling stability, and he lived every day with the terror that one wrong decision, one bad investment, one unreliable person could drag his family back down to where he had started. When Simone brought Frank home for the first time during their junior year of college, Raymond saw exactly what he was afraid of. A boy from the South Side, no father, no money, no connections. Smart, sure, polite, yes, but dreamers were dangerous, Raymond knew. Dreamers made promises they could not keep. Dreamers left, and the people who loved them were left behind to pick up the pieces. "He seems nice," Raymond said that night after Frank had gone, his voice carefully neutral in the way that meant he was about to say something he knew his daughter would not want to hear. "But what does he actually have, Simone? What can he actually give you?" "He's going to be somebody, Daddy," Simone said. "He just needs time." "Time?" Raymond shook his head slowly. "Baby, time is exactly what people say when they don't have anything else to offer." Simone did not listen. She and Frank dated through their senior year, through her graduation when he was already accepted to a program in Brussels on a full scholarship. Through the night, he took her to a small park 3 blocks from his mother's apartment and gave her a bouquet of white lilies and asked her to wait for him. She said yes. Raymond was furious. But he did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with Simone only made her more certain of whatever he was arguing against. So instead, he waited. And then he started planning. The first letter arrived 3 months after Frank left. It was postmarked from Belgium, addressed to Simone, and Raymond intercepted it before she ever knew it existed. He told himself it was for her own good. He opened the letter and read Frank's words, the words of a young man in a new country, working harder than he had ever worked, missing the woman he loved and promising her that everything he was building was for their future together. Raymond put the letter in a box in his closet. The second letter arrived a month later, then a third, then a fourth. Every one of them, Raymond intercepted. Every one of them, Simone never saw. After 6 months of silence, Simone called her father crying. "He's not writing back, Daddy. He's not calling. I think he forgot about me." Raymond held his daughter and told her what he had been waiting to tell her all along. "Baby," he said softly, "sometimes people say they're going to come back, and sometimes they find something better where they are." But he promised. "I know," Raymond held her tighter. "I know he did." A year later, Raymond took it further. He bought a prepaid phone. He downloaded an app that could change caller ID numbers, and he sent Simone a text message that appeared to come from Frank's old number. "I met someone. I think it's better if we move on. I hope you find someone who can give you what you deserve. I'm sorry." Simone did not leave her room for 3 days. Raymond told himself it was mercy. He told himself he was saving her from years of waiting for a man who might never return, who might return with nothing, who might break her heart worse the longer she held on. He told himself a lot of things. But deep in the part of himself that he tried not to examine too closely, Raymond knew exactly what he had done. He had stolen his daughter's choice. And choices, once stolen, can never be fully returned. Now you're starting to see it, aren't you? This is not a simple story about a woman who chose wrong and a man who got revenge. This is a story about how love gets twisted, how fear becomes cruelty, how the people who hurt us most are often the same people who believe they're saving us. Simone Bridges did not know the truth. She believed Frank had abandoned her. And when Terrence Knight appeared in her life 6 months later, handsome and confident, and absolutely certain that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, she said yes to his attention because the alternative was continuing to miss someone who had already forgotten her. That is what she believed. That is what her father had made sure she believed. So when Frank walked through that wedding entrance 7 years later, Simone was not looking at the man she had once loved. She was looking at the man she believed had thrown her away without a word. And her cruelty, as ugly as it was, came from a wound that had never properly healed. None of that makes what she did right. But it makes it human. And human is where the real story lives. Back to Frank's journey. At 19, he won a full academic scholarship to a university in Brussels, Belgium. An engineering and business program so competitive that the school admitted fewer than 40 international students a year. The night Diane found out, she sat at the kitchen table and cried for 20 minutes. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep inside a person that it does not have a name. The kind that happens when something you have been fighting for your entire life finally comes true. Then she made Frank a plate of food, sat across from him, and said, "You're going to go over there, and you're going to make something that lasts. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," Frank said. "And whatever you build, whatever it becomes, don't let it change what's in here." She pressed 2 fingers against her chest. "Money changes the pocket. It does not get to change the heart. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She pushed the plate toward him. "Now eat before it gets cold." 3 weeks before Frank left for Brussels, Diane collapsed on the floor of the office building she cleaned every morning. A building security guard found her at 5:47 a.m., lying unconscious beside an overturned mop bucket. The doctors at Rush University Medical Center told Frank that his mother's heart had been under enormous stress for years, that the exhaustion, the inconsistent sleep, the weight of everything she had been carrying for almost 2 decades, it had accumulated silently and then presented itself all at once, the way truly serious things often do. Frank sat in that waiting room for 11 hours. He did not eat. He barely moved. He just sat there with his hands clasped in front of him, staring at the floor, having a very private conversation with God that he has never repeated to anyone. Diane recovered. But she recovered changed. Quieter in some ways, more deliberate, like the experience had rearranged her internal priorities in ways she did not fully advertise. The day Frank left for Brussels, she walked him to the door of the apartment. She could not come to the airport. She had physical therapy that morning, and besides, she had never been good at goodbyes in public. She hugged him at the door, long and tight, the kind of hug that is really a sentence without words. "Go build something worth coming home to," she said into his shoulder. He almost did not let go. But he did. And he went. 17 years is a long time to be away from home. Long enough that the city you remember stops matching the city that actually exists. Long enough that the people you left behind have become different versions of themselves, some better, some harder, some unrecognizable. Long enough that your own name starts to feel like it belongs to someone you used to know. Frank spent those 17 years building. He started with a small logistics consulting firm in Brussels. His first client was a mid-sized manufacturer who needed someone to untangle his supply chain. Frank worked nights and weekends. He slept on a couch in his office for 4 months because he could not afford both rent and an apartment close enough to the office to make the work sustainable. He made exactly enough to cover his basic needs and reinvested everything else. Then he made one very good bet on a renewable energy startup in Germany, a small company with a brilliant founder and no idea how to scale. Frank helped them restructure. When the company sold 3 years later, his modest investment multiplied by 40. Then another bet on a real estate portfolio in Amsterdam. Then a technology licensing deal that nobody else believed in but Frank, which paid out 5 years later at a multiple that made the people who had passed on it very quiet at industry dinners. By the time Frank was 30, his company, Carter Global Holdings, was operating in 14 countries and generating revenues that made the financial press nervous because they could not quite categorize him. He gave almost no interviews. He appeared at almost no public events. He wore simple clothes. He did not buy a yacht. He did not appear on covers of magazines. He did not have an Instagram account or a publicist or a personal brand. Business journalists called him the quiet giant. One British publication ran a feature titled, "Is Frank Carter Real? Inside the Mystery Billionaire Nobody Can Find." They published his name but used a blurred photograph because they could not confirm his identity from anything public. He was that private. Meanwhile, every month, a wire transfer went to a bank account in Chicago, and Diane Carter moved into a lakefront home with a garden and a porch and a view of the water that made her laugh the first time she saw it because she had never in her life imagined having a view of anything except the alley behind her old building. She called Frank after she moved in. "This is too much," she said. "No, ma'am," Frank said. "This is exactly enough." She went quiet for a moment. The way she always did when she was feeling something too big for words. "You ate yet?" she asked. "Ma'am." "Liar," she said, and she laughed, and Frank sat in his office in Brussels, surrounded by $28 billion of assets and a staff of 270 people, and he laughed too, because some things do not change. And those are the only things that matter now. Let us talk about the flight home. Because something happened on that plane that would change the course of Frank's life in ways he never expected. On the Tuesday morning that Frank booked his flight back to Chicago, he had already made several decisions. He would not tell Simone he was coming. He wanted to see her face when she saw him again. He wanted to know if the love was still there after 7 years and an ocean between them. He would not arrive looking like a billionaire. No suits, no security, no evidence of the fortune he had built. He wanted to know if she still saw him, the real him, underneath everything else. It was a test. He knew it was a test even as he packed his old clothes into a duffel bag. He knew it as he told his driver to cancel the luxury car and find him a cab. He knew it as he slipped the engagement ring, the same ring he had been carrying for 7 years, into the pocket of his old gray jacket. He did not examine the test too closely. He did not ask himself whether it was fair to appear without warning, without context, without any of the letters and calls and efforts that he had been making for years without response. He assumed that love, if it was real, would recognize him regardless of what he was wearing. He would later have to reckon with that assumption. But not yet. If you are feeling the tension in this story, I need you to hit that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that this story matters, and it helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. Plane took off from Brussels at 7:15 in the morning. Frank took a window seat in the first-class cabin, more out of habit than desire for luxury. He stared at the clouds and thought about Simone, thought about Diane, thought about what home was supposed to feel like after 17 years away. He was still thinking about it when a voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Frank looked up. The woman standing beside him did not look like someone who needed anything from anyone. That was the first thing he noticed. She had the kind of composure that does not come from confidence seminars. It comes from having been the most capable person in the room so many times that you stop noticing whether anyone else is impressed. She was wearing a perfectly tailored cream blazer over dark slacks, carrying a slim leather portfolio, and she looked at Frank with the polite directness of someone who had long ago stopped wasting time on unnecessary pleasantries. She was beautiful in the precise, unhurried way of a woman who knows exactly what she looks like and has decided it is the least interesting thing about her. "All yours," Frank said. She sat, buckled in, opened the portfolio, started reading. For nearly an hour, neither of them spoke. Frank had almost drifted into a half-sleep when she let out a long, slow breath that sounded less like relaxation and more like someone trying not to say something they desperately needed to say. "Everything okay?" Frank asked, not looking over. "Define okay," she said. "You just sighed like someone who is about to make a decision they are not sure about." She looked at him. "That's a very specific observation." "A specific observer." She studied him for a moment, then she turned back to her portfolio. "I'm fine, thank you." Frank nodded. 20 minutes passed, then she closed the portfolio. "Can I ask you something completely out of nowhere?" she said. Frank glanced over. "Those are usually the interesting questions." She turned to face him fully. Her expression was composed, professional even, like she was about to present a quarterly earnings report. "I need a husband," she said. Frank blinked. "A fake husband," she added before he could respond. Frank leaned back slightly. "You have my attention." Her name, she explained, was Victoria Hayes. She ran Hayes Global Industries, one of America's fastest-growing companies, which her grandfather, a man named Robert Hayes, had built from a single distribution warehouse in Atlanta when he was 23 years old. Robert Hayes was now in his late 80s. He was dying, and his one final wish, the one wish he had tied to the transfer of full company control, was to see Victoria married before he passed. The board, Victoria explained, had spent the better part of 2 years testing the limits of Robert's decision-making, quietly lobbying for her uncle to take control instead. A CEO who was single, childless, and notoriously unwilling to fit the traditional mold of what a company leader was supposed to look like privately. They had used all of it against her. "If I appear at my grandfather's bedside with a stable marriage," Victoria said, "his final decision becomes nearly impossible to overturn. His word still carries everything in that company, but only if I move quickly. He has weeks, maybe less." Frank looked at her carefully. "Proposing a business arrangement," he said. $100,000 a month, she said. "Private accommodations, transportation, full confidentiality, 1 year, after which we file for a quiet, agreed-upon divorce. You're asking a stranger on an airplane." Victoria met his eyes. "I'm asking a man who helped an elderly woman with her luggage at boarding without being asked, who thanked every flight attendant by name, who has been on a 6-hour flight without once pulling out a phone to perform being important, and who, in this entire conversation, has not once looked at my legs." Frank almost smiled at that last part. "I'm flattered," he said. "And I'm going to say no." Victoria nodded slowly, as if she had expected this. "May I ask why?" "I'm going home to marry the woman I've been in love with for 9 years. Frank said. Something moved across Victoria's expression. Not disappointment exactly. More like recognition, the look of someone who has just placed a piece of a puzzle they did not know they were solving. "Then she's lucky," Victoria said simply. And she reopened her portfolio. The conversation should have ended there. But then Frank saw the letterhead. It was an accident at first. A simple shift in Victoria's posture as she reached for her reading glasses, and the portfolio tilted slightly, revealing the top page of the document she was reading, Carter Global Holdings. Frank's heart stopped. His company, she was reading a proposal to his company. His eyes moved quickly across what he could see. A partnership proposal. Hayes Global Industries wanted access to Carter Global's European distribution network. The investment request was for $100 million. $100 million. It was, Frank immediately recognized, too small. Hayes Global was worth far more than that. Victoria was underselling herself because she was afraid of asking for what the partnership was actually worth. She was playing it safe because she did not know what he knew, that the people reviewing her proposal would see the modest ask and wonder what she was hiding. Frank made a choice. He could have said nothing. He could have let her send the proposal exactly as it was, watched it get rejected for exactly the reasons he predicted, and moved on with his life. Or he could reveal who he was, tell her the truth. Have an honest conversation. He did neither. Instead, when Victoria stepped away to use the restroom 20 minutes later, Frank looked at the open laptop she had left on her tray table, the proposal document still visible on the screen. He made a decision he would later have to answer for. He added 10 to the investment request. 100 million became 1 billion. Then he closed the laptop and returned to staring out the window as if nothing had happened. The plane landed at O'Hare. Just after 3 p.m. Victoria was gathering her things when her phone started buzzing. Then buzzing again. Then her assistant was calling so many times in succession that Victoria looked at the screen with alarm. She answered. Frank heard, from 3 feet away through the phone's speaker, the unmistakable sound of someone screaming good news. Victoria's face changed completely. "What do you mean they approved it?" she said. Frank kept his back to her, reaching for his duffel bag. "Full amount?" Victoria's voice dropped to almost nothing. They approved $1 billion. There was a pause, then Victoria's voice went cold. "Request was for 100 million, she said slowly. "What do you mean the proposal says 1 billion? Frank did not turn around. "Send me the email confirmation," Victoria said. "Right now." There was silence as she read. Could feel her eyes on his back. "Hold on," Victoria said into the phone. Then louder, "Excuse me." Frank turned. Victoria was staring at him with an expression he recognized. It was the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing next to something much larger than they understood, and not in a good way. "You touched my laptop," she said. It was not a question. Frank met her eyes. "Yes. You changed my proposal." "I added 10. For a moment, Victoria did not respond. Then her composure cracked just slightly, just enough to reveal the fury underneath. "You had no right," she said. "You had absolutely no right. You're correct. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Victoria's voice was rising, but controlled, the anger of someone who had learned long ago to keep her explosions contained. "Carter Global just approved $1 billion proposal that I did not authorize. $1 billion. I now have to explain to my board, to my legal team, to my grandfather's estate, how a document I signed changed without my knowledge." "I understand," Frank said. "No, you don't understand." Victoria stepped closer. "If they think this was a mistake, if they think I'm incompetent or dishonest, they'll withdraw the entire deal. Everything I've worked for, everything my grandfather built, gone, because some stranger on an airplane decided he knew better than me." Frank absorbed that. "Right," he said finally. "I should not have done that without asking," Victoria demanded. "There's always a but with men like you." "But," Frank said, "I was wrong. I am sorry." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. She was not prepared for a genuine apology. She had been ready for arguments, justifications, explanations. She had not been ready for accountability. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Really?" Frank considered lying, considered deflecting, considered walking away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple, understated, printed on heavy cream stock with black lettering. Frank Carter, founder and CEO, Carter Global Holdings. Victoria looked at the card, then at his worn jacket, then at his old boots, then back at the card. "Joking," she said. "I am not. You're the CEO of Carter Global, the company that just approved $1 billion proposal that you wrote." "Yes." Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Opened it again. She stopped, took a breath. "You could have told me at any point. You could have just told me who you were." "You're right," Frank said. "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" Frank looked at her for a long moment. "Because I wanted to see what you would do when you thought no one was watching," he said quietly. "And I learned something. You're worth the $1 billion. Your company is worth it. You're the one who didn't believe it." Victoria stared at him. The fury was still there, but something else was mixed with it now, something she could not quite name. "That's not an excuse," she said finally. "I know. You violated my autonomy. You made a decision about my life without my consent. I know. You think I'm sorry makes that okay?" "No," Frank said. "But it's where I have to start." Victoria looked at him for another long moment. Then she put his business card in her pocket. "You owe me a conversation," she said. A real one, without games or tests or whatever this was. I know, Frank said, and I'm still angry. I know that too. Victoria picked up her portfolio and her laptop. Call you, she said. When I'm ready. Then she walked into the crowd and disappeared. Frank stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. He had met a woman who did not take his apology as permission to forgive him. A woman who could hold anger and curiosity at the same time. A woman who had just discovered he was worth billions and had not changed her posture by a single degree. It was, Frank realized, the most interesting conversation he had had in years. Then he picked up his duffel bag and went to face the woman he had been in love with for nearly a decade. You already know what happened at the wedding. You already saw Simone's face when she laughed. You already heard Terrence Knight's dismissive words. You already watched Frank place the white lilies on the table and walk away without revealing who he really was. But what you do not know yet is what happened next. And what happened next is going to change everything. 1 hour after Frank left the wedding, a journalist in New York published a story. It had been in development for weeks. The journalist had finally confirmed, through shipping records and flight manifests and corporate filings, the identity of the man the financial world had been calling the Quiet Giant. Headline read, exclusive. The Quiet Giant identified Chicago-born billionaire Frank Carter RETURNS2, the United States, after building Carter Global into a $28 billion empire. The article had photographs. A recent one from a European business summit where Frank, in an elegant navy suit, shook hands with a prime minister. And an older one, a university ID photo from Brussels, digitally enhanced. The face in both photos was unmistakable. It was the man who had walked into Simone Bridges's wedding carrying white lilies and wearing work boots. The story went viral in 47 minutes. By the time it reached the wedding tent, it had been shared 11,000 times. Simone's cousin was the first to see it. She had been scrolling through her phone at the reception, half listening to her husband complain about the catering when the notification popped up. Oh my God, she said. Her husband looked up. What? That man, the one who showed up earlier in the old clothes. Homeless-looking guy. What about him? Simone's cousin turned her phone around. The photograph on the screen was unmistakable. He's worth $28 billion, she said. The whisper spread through the reception like fire through dry grass, table by table, cluster by cluster, until suddenly everyone was looking at their phones, everyone was reading the same article, and everyone was turning to stare at Simone Bridges. Terrence Knight saw the headline and felt his entire body go cold. Simone saw the photograph and felt the floor drop out from beneath her. No, she whispered. No, that's impossible. Her mother grabbed her arm. Simone, what is this? What is everyone talking about? Simone could not answer. She was staring at the photograph, at the face of the man she had just humiliated in front of everyone she knew. $28 billion, the man she had called broke, the man she had laughed at, the man who had come home like he promised 7 years later, and she had sent him away without even listening. He wasn't lying, Simone said, her voice barely audible. He came back. He really came back. And then something inside her cracked open. 7 years of believing he had abandoned her. 7 years of convincing herself that she had made the right choice by moving on. 7 years of telling herself that Frank Carter had forgotten her, had found someone better, had sent her that horrible text message saying goodbye. Now she was looking at a photograph of him shaking hands with world leaders. And she was wearing a wedding dress at a reception for the wrong man. Simone turned to her father. Raymond Bridges was standing at the edge of the tent, his face pale, his hands shaking. Daddy, Simone said slowly. How did you know Frank wasn't coming back? Raymond did not answer. Daddy. Simone's voice rose. How did you know? Raymond looked at his daughter. For one terrible moment, the truth was written all over his face. Simone, the letters, Simone said. The ones I never received, the text message, the one that said he'd met someone else. Raymond's silence was its own confession. Simone felt the world tilt sideways. You did this, she whispered. You kept me from him, you made me believe he'd forgotten me. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. Simone's voice broke across the reception like glass shattering. You stole 7 years of my life, you made me believe the man I loved had abandoned me. The entire wedding party was watching now. Terrence Knight looked like he wanted to disappear. You didn't even give me a choice, Simone said, tears streaming down her face. You decided for me. You decided what I was worth. You decided who I should love. Raymond reached for her arm. Simone, please, she pulled away. Then she grabbed the hem of her wedding dress and ran out of the tent. down the driveway, past the luxury cars and the confused valets and the shocked faces of her own wedding guests. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to find Frank before it was too late. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Hayes was sitting in her hotel's suite, staring at the same article on her laptop screen. The photograph was clear. The story was detailed. And suddenly, everything that had happened on that airplane made perfect sense. The man who had caught her laptop, the man who had added 10 to her proposal. The man who had apologized without making excuses and then walked away wearing clothes that cost less than her shoes. He was the billionaire. He had been the billionaire the entire time. Victoria picked up her phone and looked at the business card he had given her. She should have been angrier. He had played games with her. He had tested her. He had made decisions about her business without her consent, but there was something else underneath the anger. Something that felt dangerously close to respect. Had apologized, really apologized. He had not made excuses. He had not hidden behind his wealth or his power. He had simply said he was wrong. When was the last time a man with that much power had told her he was wrong? Victoria dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. Hello? Frank's voice was quiet, tired. You owe me a conversation, Victoria said. And I decided I'm ready now. There was a pause. Where are you? Frank asked. Victoria told him. Be there in 40 minutes, he said. Good, Victoria said. And Frank? Yes, still angry. I know, he said. Then the line went quiet. Victoria set down her phone and looked at her reflection in the dark window. Somewhere across the city, a woman who had made the wrong choice was running through the streets in a wedding dress, searching for a man she had thrown away.
No,
and somewhere
wait!
else, a man who had spent 17 years building an empire was driving toward a woman who had every right to hate him. 2 women, 2 paths, 1 man. And the night was just beginning. If you want to know what happens when Victoria and Frank finally meet face to face, what Simone discovers when she confronts her father about the letters, and the choice that will change all 3 of their lives forever, then you need to be here. Because this story is about to get more interesting. Frank brought Victoria to his mother's house on a Sunday afternoon in late April, almost exactly 1 year after that flight from Brussels. Diane had been cooking since 6 a.m., not because she needed to. The meal she prepared could have been made in 2 hours. But Diane Carter approached cooking for guests the way she approached everything else in life, with an intensity and thoroughness that left no room for shortcuts. The table was set with her best dishes. The ones she had bought with her first paycheck from Mr. Clarence's restaurant 30 years ago, and had carried with her through every apartment, every move, every chapter of her life. White plates with a thin gold rim. Simple, elegant, earned. When Frank and Victoria walked through the door, Diane was standing in the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and the posture of a woman who was about to conduct the most important interview of someone's life. Frank said, "This is Victoria." Diane looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Diane. For 5 seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Diane extended her hand. "So you're the one who asked my son to be a fake husband," Diane said. Frank closed his eyes. "Mama," Victoria shook Diane's hand. "Yes, ma'am, that was me. $800,000 a month, I heard." "That was the offer," Victoria confirmed. Diane looked her up and down, not rudely, assessingly. "You underpaid." Victoria blinked, then she laughed. Diane smiled. "Come in," Diane said. "Sit down, food's almost ready." The dinner at Diane's house lasted 4 hours. Diane asked Victoria questions that no interviewer, no board member, no journalist had ever thought to ask. "What did your grandfather smell like?" Diane asked. Victoria looked startled. "Excuse me, your grandfather, Robert. Frank told me about him. What did he smell like?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Peppermint," she said, "and old paper." He always had peppermint candies in his pocket, and he read the newspaper every morning even after everything went digital. His hands always smelled like newsprint. Diane nodded slowly. "That's how you know someone was real," Diane said. "When you remember what they smelled like, the important people don't just live in your memory, they live in your senses." Victoria's eyes glistened. She blinked twice, steadied herself. "He would have liked you," Victoria said to Diane. "I know," Diane said simply. After dinner, Diane sent Frank to the kitchen to wash dishes. This was not a request. It was a command delivered with the same quiet authority Diane brought to everything. Frank went. Diane and Victoria sat on the porch. The lake stretched out before them, silver and calm under the afternoon sun. "My son has a problem," Diane said. Victoria looked at her. "Which one?" Diane laughed, a full, rich laugh that came from somewhere deep. "Like you," Diane said. "I didn't expect to, but I do." "Thank you." "Problem," Diane continued, is that he tests people. He's been doing it since he was a boy. He tests them because he's afraid that if he just trusts, he'll be hurt. So he creates situations where he can watch and evaluate and decide from a safe distance whether someone is worth believing in. Victoria nodded slowly. I know. You know because he told you, or you know because you figured it out? Both, Victoria said. He told me after I figured it out, which is very him. Diane smiled. He's learning, Diane said. He's better than he was, but he will always carry that instinct. The question is whether you can love someone who will sometimes, despite his best intentions, retreat into observation instead of staying in the moment. Victoria was quiet for a long time. My grandfather used to say, Victoria said carefully, that love is not about finding someone without flaws. It's about finding someone whose flaws you can live beside without losing yourself. Diane looked at her. Robert Hayes, Diane said. Peppermint and old paper. Peppermint and old paper, Victoria repeated. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Diane reached over and patted Victoria's hand once. Do, Diane said. Victoria smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Diane. Thank you, Diane. Now let me take you to a quiet moment that happened 3 weeks later that nobody saw except Frank. It was a Tuesday night. Frank was alone in his apartment. Victoria was in Atlanta handling a board meeting. Diane was asleep in her lakefront home. Frank sat at his desk. In front of him was a sheet of paper and a pen. He had been thinking about Simone, not with longing, not with anger, not with the bitterness of a man who was wronged and wanted the world to know it. He had been thinking about her with something closer to sadness. The specific sadness of understanding, too late, that two people who loved each other had been destroyed not by a lack of love but by a combination of silence, fear, and the actions of someone who believed they were helping. Frank picked up the pen. He did not write a letter to Simone. That was not his place anymore, and he understood that. Whatever Simone was building now, whatever life she was constructing from the pieces of what had been broken, it was hers to build, not his to enter. Instead, Frank wrote something for himself, not a business plan, not a strategy document, not a spreadsheet or a proposal or any of the formats his mind naturally worked in. He wrote a list. At the top of the page, in careful handwriting, he wrote, things I know now that I didn't know then. And underneath, he wrote, 1. Love is not a test. It is a choice you make every day openly, without conditions, without a backup plan. 2. Silence is not the same as strength. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is speak when it would be easier to stay quiet. 3. Assumptions are the most expensive mistakes a smart person can make. 4. You cannot protect yourself into love. You can only risk yourself into it. 5. The woman who changed my proposal without permission was me. I just did it to someone else's life instead of a spreadsheet. 6. My mother was right. She is always right. I should start with that assumption instead. 7. Forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about putting down the weight so you can walk forward without it. He looked at the list for a long time. Then he added one more line. 8. Victoria doesn't need me to fix anything, manage anything, or test anything. She needs me to stay, that's it. Just stay. Frank folded the paper, put it in the drawer of his desk. He never showed it to anyone, but he lived it. Every day after that, he lived it 1 year to the day after Frank and Victoria first met on that flight from Brussels. Frank asked Victoria to meet him at the Art Institute of Chicago. She arrived at 6 p.m. The museum was closed. Frank had arranged a private visit, just the two of them, walking through the empty galleries with their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. They stopped in front of the Henry Ossawa Tanner painting. The one Victoria had pointed to on their first real outing together, the young man studying by lamplight. The painting, she had said, reminded her of Frank in his apartment above the bakery in Brussels. Victoria looked at the painting, then at Frank. You brought me back here, she said. I did. Why? Frank reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria's breath caught. He pulled out a small box, black velvet. Simple, he opened it. Inside was a ring, not the ring he had carried for Simone. That ring was gone, donated anonymously to a charity auction 3 months earlier without ceremony or sentiment. It belonged to a different version of himself, and he had let it go the way you let go of anything that no longer fits. This ring was new. A single stone on a platinum band. Elegant, understated. Chosen specifically because Victoria did not want to be overwhelmed. She wanted to be understood. Frank did not get on one knee. He stood in front of her, eye to eye, the way two equals stand when they are making the most important decision of their lives together. Victoria, he said, I spent 17 years building a company. I spent 7 years carrying a ring for the wrong person. I spent my whole life testing people because I was afraid that if I just trusted, I'd be hurt. He paused. I'm done testing. I'm done performing. I'm done managing every outcome. I'm standing here with no backup plan and no safety net and nothing except the truth. He held the ring between them. Love you. Not because you're brilliant or beautiful or successful, although you are all of those things. I love you because you told me I was wrong and you meant it. Because you didn't forgive me until I earned it. Because you ate jollof rice at a plastic table and argued with me about jazz for 11 months. Because you let me see you cry. Because you have a mug that says world's okayest CEO and a table held together with cardboard and you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. Victoria's eyes were full. She did not blink the moisture away this time. Will you marry me? Frank said. For real, no contracts, no conditions, no exit strategy. Victoria looked at him, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Yes, she said. And Frank Carter slid the ring onto Victoria Hayes's finger in front of a painting of a young black man studying by lamplight, in an empty museum in the city where he was born. And he kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the only witnesses were the paintings on the walls, which had seen 1,000 years of human stories, and recognized this one as true. They were married 4 months later. Not in a grand ballroom. Not in a cathedral. Not in any of the places that people with their kind of money were expected to choose. They were married in Diane Carter's backyard, the lakefront home with the garden and the porch, and the view that had once made Diane laugh, because she never imagined having a view of anything except the alley behind her old apartment. 50 people. Close friends and family only. A pastor from the church Diane had attended for 30 years. Flowers from the same shop where Frank had bought white lilies all those years ago, except this time the flowers were sunflowers, because Victoria said sunflowers look like they are always turning toward the light, and that was how she wanted to live. Diane sat in the front row. She wore a dress she had bought with her own money from a department store she had walked past 1,000 times during the years she could not afford to enter. She looked at her son standing at the altar, and she did not cry. She smiled. The smile of a woman who had drunk water for dinner so her child could eat, who had worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours and hidden a notebook under her mattress with a column labeled Frank's School Fund, who had collapsed on the floor of an office building and survived, who had told her son that money changes the pocket but does not get to change the heart, and whose son had listened. Frank looked at his mother from the altar, and he mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Diane pressed 2 fingers against her chest, over her heart, the same gesture she had made the night she told him to never let success change what was inside him. Then the ceremony began 14 months after the wedding. On a Sunday afternoon that felt like any other Sunday, Frank was sitting on his mother's porch reading a book when his phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number he did not recognize. He opened it. Frank, it's Simone. I'm not writing to apologize again because I've already done that, and I think apologies without change are just performances. I'm writing to tell you that I found the letters, all 11 of them. My father kept them in a shoebox in his closet. I've read every one. I know what you wrote. I know what you promised. And I know that you kept every single promise, even the ones I never heard. Frank read the message twice. I left Terrence 8 months ago. I moved to Atlanta. I'm working at a nonprofit that helps young women from low-income backgrounds get access to mentorship and education. I'm not telling you this because I want anything from you. I'm telling you because you should know that the girl you loved in that park, the one who cried when you gave her white lilies, she's still here. She just got lost for a while. Frank stared at the screen. I hope Victoria makes you happy. From what I've read and heard, she's remarkable, and I hope your mother is well. She was always the strongest woman I ever met. Message ended with one final line. Thank you for coming back, even though I didn't deserve it. It mattered that you came. Frank put the phone down. He looked out at the lake for a long time. Then he picked the phone back up and typed one sentence. I'm glad you found your way, Simone. I really am. He pressed send. Then he set the phone down and went back to reading his book on his mother's porch, with the sound of the water and the wind, and the distant laughter of Victoria and Diane, inside the kitchen arguing about whether sweet potato pie needs marshmallows on top, an argument that Diane was winning through sheer force of moral authority. Frank smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile he had worn for 17 years in boardrooms and negotiations, and on the day he walked into a wedding carrying white lilies. A real smile. The smile of a man who had finally stopped testing the world and started trusting it. So, what did this story teach us? It taught us that love is not a test you administer from a safe distance. Love is a risk you take up close, with your whole chest exposed, knowing that you might get hurt, and deciding that the possibility of something real is worth more than the certainty of something safe. It taught us that the people who hurt us most are often the people who believe they are saving us. Raymond Bridges loved his daughter. That love became fear, and that fear became control, and that control became theft. He stole his daughter's choice because he could not trust her to make it herself, and the cost was 7 years that none of them will ever get back. It taught us that forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a process. Simone had to forgive her father. Frank had to forgive himself. Victoria had to forgive the world that told her she could not be both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. It taught us that the people who believe in you before they know what you are worth, the ones who see you when you look like nothing and treat you like you are everything, those are the people you hold on to with both hands and never let go. And it taught us that Diane Carter was right all along. Money changes the pocket. It does not get to change the heart. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something you were not expecting to feel, then do me one favor. Share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is being tested by life and wondering if it is worth it. Someone who is afraid to trust because they have been burned before. Someone who needs to be reminded that the best things in life are not the things you control. They are the things you have the courage to let happen. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. And I will see you in the next story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the richest life is not the one with the most money. It is the one with the most truth.